This is MichMash, a weekly conversation where we try to unjumble an important and sometimes under-the-radar statewide story that affects you. I'm Cheyna Roth.
And I'm Alethia, Kasben.
The budget dispute in the Michigan legislature continues this week, with the Michigan House Republicans quickly unveiling and then passing its budget for K-12 schools, which, given all the machinations behind the scenes, kind of surprising.
Yeah, that's right. Education groups and Democrats have been calling on the Republican majority in the House to present its budget ahead of a July 1 deadline. And they partly answered the call this week with a series of education budgets. And, Republicans, they have been promising a different approach to budgeting, and they certainly did that with their K-12 budget.
The House GOP proposal, which was unveiled and voted on during the same day this week, let's dig into that, gives schools one large pot of money to be distributed on a per-pupil basis rather than funding many specific initiatives. So think free breakfast and lunch and mental health funding. It also provides millions in taxpayer dollars to non-public schools, which would test a constitutional ban on such spending if it were to become law. So they're kind of messing around with a few things here.
Yeah, a quick aside view to the non-public school funding item, between the Senate and the governor, that is very unlikely to become law, but it is still interesting that they are putting it out there. A Republican leader in the House said, if we do this and someone wants to sue, go ahead and sue. But we won't dig too much into that right now. Unlikely to become law. We'll talk about that later. But looking at this big pot of money that House Republicans are proposing, the K-12 budget has traditionally included what we call categoricals. This is spending in a specific category. Like you said, free breakfast and lunch, that has gotten about $200 million in the past. $25 million for mental health supports, things like that. In this proposal, though, the House said we are going to create a $3 billion bucket of money that will go to schools that can spend it how they like. So maybe they will spend it on free breakfast and lunch, or maybe they'll do something else. Opponents say this method would lead to important things like literacy initiatives, free meals, mental health not getting funded.
So to get that money, schools would have to commit to having one school resource officer and one mental health professional on staff. They would also need to report what they are spending it on. With the House action, all of the players, the Senate, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and the House have released proposals ahead of July 1. Remember, these are just proposals, which is when schools start their fiscal years and when they like to see an actual finished budget. And these proposals are very far apart.
Right. Like there have been years past where maybe a budget hasn't been completely finished by early July, but all of the proposals are out and schools can kind of decide, we kind of know what we're going to get. We have an idea. These proposals are so far apart that schools do not know right now what they are going to get. The Senate K-12 budget leader said this week that negotiations would be pretty lengthy if the House is going to dig in on its proposals. School groups have also called this budget not serious. So even though the House budget is out, I don't think we're in a different place procedurally.
Exactly. And the proposal also takes aim at diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in schools, continuing the effort of President Donald Trump's administration. Under the budget, schools would lose 20% of their per-pupil funding if the district uses curriculum that includes, quote, race or gender stereotyping, or uses state funding for, quote, so-called DEI initiatives.
So where do we go from here?
Great question.
It is just hard to say. Although the House has acted after weeks of Democrats calling on the Republicans to move a budget, there are not a lot of pieces that appear primed for support from the Democrats, who control the Senate and, of course, the governor's office.
And schools, as we said, would love to have at least an idea of what they might see in their budgets by July 1 with their fiscal years beginning. Michigan lawmakers have made it a priority to at least get education budgets complete before summer during the last decade.
There are still a few weeks left before lawmakers are going to break for summer recess, but so far we are not seeing any real indication that negotiations can move quickly here.
However, we do know when the legislature wants to, they can move quickly. We shall see if that actually happens here. Well, we're going to switch gears here, and after this short break, we're going to talk with Small Business Association of Michigan CEO Brian Calley.
Welcome back to MichMash. We're joined now by Brian Calley, President and CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan. Welcome, Brian.
Thanks for having me on.
Let's start with a new poll that your organization did about healthcare costs. You got responses from about 300 small business owners and asked them about the cost of providing healthcare. So what did they say?
This is the biggest issue for small business owners that not very many people are talking about right now. This year-over-year cost experience that is driving up costs by generally double digits every single year. Small business owners are really hitting a breaking point these days. They tell us that they're at a point, for example, 4 out of 5 say it's getting in the way of investing to expand the business. 3 out of 4, more than 3 out of 4 said that it's an impediment to hiring. And as you look at the overall financial and economic performance in the state kind of eroding away over the last year or so, you see, no kind of big dramatic changes, but just subtle month-over-month changes. These are the sorts of things that can be really damaging over time because people are never jolted into action. And so this, I think, is a big warning sign where small business owners are saying, hey, wait a minute. This, when it comes to hiring people or expanding business, the thing that creates the economic activity, and most of it comes from smaller companies, we really can't do it right now. And so that's there's a lot of attention, a lot of focus on a lot of other issues, and rightfully so. But this is one that I think really people need to pay more attention to.
So do we have, any idea where this increase is coming from? Is there a cause that we can sort of pinpoint here?
Well, the good news is, yes, we do know where it's coming from. It's because when health insurers make claims or when they make rate filings, you can see the claims experience. You can see exactly where it's coming from. There are 2 major drivers that are pushing costs up. There's health systems themselves. Health systems, your local hospital, there's not too many of those around anymore. These are huge multi-billion-dollar conglomerates with a tremendous amount of pricing power, and they're always building more and more, and that infrastructure needs to be fed. So utilization in health systems is one of the major drivers, and then pharmaceuticals being the other major driver. So you have these massive players, and the thing that is disheartening to smaller companies in this is that you can look at the claims experience that and the underwriting losses that the 2 largest insurers in Michigan experienced last year. Blue Cross had $1.6 or $1.7 billion underwriting loss. What that means is that the claims, the payments out, were $1.7 billion more than the premiums charged. So small business owners see that and say, well, what is the hope? Where's the hope that anything is going to get any better if there's that big a gap that premiums were essentially undercharged for the claims? So this is something that smaller employers are really just along for the ride on. Like they're buying insurance off the rack. They're not big enough to be self-insured, and so that is it's a really disheartening situation to see. A lot of people in the system kind of pointing back and forth on whose fault this is. And the ones paying the bills at the end of the day are saying, we can't hire, we can't grow because of this cost.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of what the businesses are doing, your survey also found that, 91% of the respondents, they want to provide health insurance. This isn't like they're all trying to cut corners and saying, oh, nope, we're not going to do it. They want to be able to do this, especially because it's important for employee retention and satisfaction. So how are they balancing this?
There's a lot of different things that are happening, but the low-hanging fruit is been plucked already. And I think that's why you see desperation growing. Modest changes in, shifting a little cost share or making a deductible change and that sort of thing. The modest changes have already been made. And so now there are only painful changes in front of small business owners. Yeah, can asking the question, can I afford to offer this benefit anymore? or do we have to move to a much more substantial cost share, whether it's the increasing out-of-pocket expenses for employees, or the amount of the premium that the business pays in the first place. Some are going to allowances, like here's a fixed amount to go buy your own health insurance. Those types of changes are very, very difficult, and small business owners don't want to go down that direction. There's a competitiveness issue that they face in the marketplace, of course, but then also small businesses tend to operate like families. And sometimes it's like literally family, but even when it's not literally family, these types of changes really weigh heavy on them. And I think that's where the elevated nature of this concern comes from, the concern over the employees.
It's funny when you say, the different parts of the system kind of point at each other. When we received your survey at Gongwer and I assigned it to a reporter, they made some calls and definitely experienced from different spokespeople like, well, it's not just us, or it's not us. There's also, this over here that's also a factor in this cost increase. So we're definitely seeing that. Do you think this is a problem that can be solved or helped, with the legislature? Does there need to be some law changes here? How can we work to solve this issue?
It's a huge issue, and I wish I had a simple answer for it. But let me give you a direction that I think we need to go in that is well supported with areas where you see costs being managed better, and it's the idea of paying for health. Today, our system, for the most part, pays to deal with problems that arise, but the systems, whether you're talking about pharmaceutical companies or health systems, they make less money if people are more healthy. And as long as we have a system where the way that you maximize the revenue that you receive is by treating problems, there's no incentive, and there's nothing nefarious here. It's just there's no incentive to do the things that prevent the problems. And the prevent the problems doesn't mean just getting tests. We're talking about really being healthy. So making even modest or incremental steps toward health systems being paid to keep people healthy, like making it worth their while to keep people healthy. And if employees who engage in just healthy behaviors and healthy habits, that if there was a difference where employees could reap the rewards from this, and it's different. I know sometimes people are concerned whenever somebody talks like this, like, what about somebody that's unhealthy and through, a genetic issue, or no cause of their own, or, some sort of issue. And of course, that's what we want the system there for. But the idea of some way of saying to people, consumers of healthcare, to saying to businesses, provide wellness and health services and your costs will be less. Employees, utilize wellness and health services and your costs will be less. And in hospital systems, you don't have, the only way that you make money today is to drive utilization of the infrastructure you built. But you can also make money, hopefully more money, by keeping people healthy so they don't have to utilize that system so much. That making movements toward that type of system, I think, is important on a cost basis, but it's also just from a human experience basis. Something has to change here, and these are difficult. You're moving people's cheese when you start talking like this, and so it is. These are difficult changes. I wouldn't understate it. If it was easy, it would have already happened, but it's just at a point where something has to change.
I want to talk about another concern that I'm sure has been plaguing small businesses, which is tariffs. What have you heard from members about the sort of back and forth and up and down with the Trump administration's tariff plans?
There's wildly different experiences with tariff policy. So it's different. It's difficult to encapsulate it and say, here's the small business experience. I will say uncertainty overall, including in tariff policy. Uncertainty is something that people who own businesses do not like to deal with. It does cause them to wait and see. Better just wait a little longer, see what happens before making an important decision, particularly when there are decisions with high financial consequences. So there are some on the side of the ledger where they have capacity left in manufacturing, maybe have lost certain contracts to overseas providers, and then all of a sudden they're back in style and people are looking for local capacity to reduce some of these risks. And so we do see some small businesses saying, this is great, I'm actually back in the game, and there's an incentive for people to keep a little bit more of this production or a higher proportion of the production back home. We see on the other end of the spectrum people that have built their business models around importing certain aspects, in some cases everything, but pieces, important components. And then their business model is undermined, and they're the most at risk. And then in the middle, you've got those who maybe do mainly operate in this country, but they might have a critical or key component that is difficult to get. And so being able to absorb those kinds of costs can be a challenge too. I think the biggest open question right now is, how does the cost get absorbed and who absorbs the cost? It's a little bit too early to tell for sure how that's going to land, but I think the consumer experience at the end of the day is a pretty big open experience or open question.
Switching gears a little bit here. So 2026 is obviously an election year. What, races is SBAM going to be most kind of focused on? We obviously could have a potential huge change in the governor's office. The legislature is fully up for grabs. What are you guys watching and hoping for here?
At SBAM, we really focus on state level elections. We don't get involved in federal elections. The legislature is something that's a given. Every election in the House and every other election cycle in the Senate is where the majority of our involvement lies. The gubernatorial election is always an open question for an organization like ours: when to get involved and if to get involved. We have very practical people, and they like to get involved in areas where we think we could really make a difference. So, to somebody worthy of this support, endorsement, and help. And as a first question, and the second is, are they a legit candidate? Do they actually have a plan where they could pull this off? And those questions have to be met before we get involved. But yeah, there's a lot at stake here. It's kind of a crossroads for Michigan. The legislature being about as close as it can be without a literal tie for the last few years. This is going to be a cycle where I expect we'll be heavily engaged. We do so on a bipartisan basis. We don't think in terms of Republican versus Democrat, just pro small business. And everybody says they're pro small business. That's the thing. Nobody's against small business, but part of our role is to define, what does that mean? What are the issues that are most important? And those are positions that are carried by the staff, but not decided by the staff. We have actual small business owners that are in top volunteer positions that engage with membership at large and come to conclusions. And then people like me carry those conclusions and to try to advance them in the system.
Hello, it's Hernz Laguerre Jr., producer of MichMash, and we have a special event coming your way. I'll let the host tell you all about it.
Hello, MichMash here. I'm Cheyna Roth.
And I'm Alethia Kasben.
And I'm Zach Gorchow.
And we're going to be coming to you live on June 16th at 7 p.m. at the Go Comedy Improv Theater in Ferndale.
That's right. We will be recording a live MichMash episode with special guests to review the major and under-the-radar statewide stories for the first half of 2025. We'll also look ahead to 2026.
You'll be able to meet us, plus there's a cash bar. Who doesn't love that? There's going to be wonky giveaways, get excited, and an all-around fun time.
So please run, don't walk to the links available at wdet.org/events or on any of WDET's and Gongwer's social media channels to sign up. Space is limited, and we can't wait to see you there.
Thank you, team. And those special guests for the June 16th event are Detroit Free Press political editor Emily Lawler, the Detroit News political editor, Chad Livengood, and the Baldy bipartisan duo, John Selleck and Adrian Heeman. And like the team said, sign up quick. Tickets are limited. And now back to the regularly scheduled programming.
So speaking of 2026, former Governor Rick Snyder, whom you served under as lieutenant governor, has jumped back into the political realm. Last year, he was very involved in the House Republican operation as they won back the majority. This year, he's floating an education proposal. He may try to get on the ballot in 2026. This potential proposal isn't defined just yet, but what are your thoughts on the former governor looking to get back into the mix in this way?
Well, Rick Snyder is such an interesting person. Most of my time in serving with him, he was very apolitical. And even though he got elected in a system, clearly didn't enjoy being in the political system. And so see him jump back in, I know where his heart comes from. And that's just that he wants the best for Michigan. He wants to see things to progress, in some cases preserved. And so getting back in, I know that where his heart is, and he's one of the smartest people. So I think his contributions will be important and meaningful to the overall debate and what's happening in Michigan and the direction that we go. I think education is the right focus. Anybody who is looking to make a difference, whether it's a former governor or an aspiring governor, that if you want to make a difference in the future of our state, we do need to elevate, advance, and fix our education system. We've just been falling behind, and again, it's kind of like our economy, where there's no individual individual crisis point where it seems like the bottom falls out, but just the erosion over time of the effectiveness, especially relative to other states, and it's frustrating when you see a state like Mississippi that was always last or close to last on things advance their literacy in their schools. They'd say, well, if Mississippi can do it, and all due respect, and I don't mean to insult Mississippi, but for heaven's sakes, if Mississippi can go from 49th to top 10 in reading, well, I mean, can't Michigan do that? And so I think I think this is the right focus. Anybody who wants to change the trajectory of Michigan long-term, education has to be the top concern.
So school sort of adjacent, but also budget related. So when you were lieutenant governor, the getting budgets done around summer really seemed to start, right? We're seeing now that, the budget situation may not get there, with the split in power right now. So what are your thoughts on the budget situation at the moment?
It is harder to get budgets done when you have divided power, and especially if you have very different end goal priorities. And I think that's what we see playing out right now. And it's not the sort of thing that you can artificially hurry along. There's a process when you start further apart. We were fortunate during my time in office that we didn't start so far apart from the different pieces, and so getting things over the finish line in agreed to in May and done in June was still hard. It was definitely different than what had normally happened in Michigan before that. But when you start far apart and have different ideas of where you want to end, a process has to ensue, and that process is going to be bumpy. It's going to be ugly at times, but at the end of the day, they'll get there because they have to get there. But they probably won't get there early. It'll be later than what people are used to. I'll be surprised if you have a budget before September.
Brian Calley, thank you so much for joining us here today on MichMash.
My pleasure. Thank you.